2013, Delta Airlines signs a joint venture with Japan Airlines, the historic rival of ANA, the company the Japanese government saved from bankruptcy with 350 billion yen in public money. Overnight, an American carrier begins coordinating prices, routes, and revenue with Japan's second-largest operator. The Delta-JAL axis dominates more than 40% of trans-Pacific capacity between the two countries. That alone would be enough to wake any ANA executive in a cold sweat at 3 in the morning. But Delta didn't stop there. In January 2015, Skymark Airlines, Japan's third-largest carrier, operating domestic routes ANA couldn't afford to lose, collapsed financially. $320 billion in debt, active operating certificates, gates at congested airports, and no law explicitly preventing a foreign investor from resurrecting that carcass under a new name and American capital. ANA had two options: watch or pay. Over $1 billion and just 90 days to decide. What ANA did surprised the entire global aviation market and sent a message to the world. Founded in 1952 with 2 helicopters and an air taxi contract, the company grew to become Japan's largest aviation group by revenue, operating more than 200 domestic and international destinations with a fleet of over 280 aircraft. In 2014, ANA carried 51 million passengers. For scale, that's equivalent to the mobility GDP of a country the size of South Korea concentrated in a single company. But ANA's real power isn't in its planes, it's in its slots. Landing and takeoff slots at Haneda Airport are the scarcest asset in Asian aviation. Haneda operates less than 15 kilometers from central Tokyo, the world's largest metropolitan area by urban footprint. Each slot is worth tens of millions of dollars in the secondary market in the few countries where trading them is legal. In Japan, it isn't. And there lies the paradox. ANA built its empire precisely because the Japanese aviation market is one of the most closed on the planet. Foreign ownership capped at 33% by law, slot allocation controlled by the government, domestic routes inaccessible to outside operators. That closure protected ANA for decades, and it was exactly that closure that in 2015 became a vulnerability. Since 2010, when the bilateral treaty between the US and Japan reopened Haneda to international flights, Delta had been occupying night slots and methodically expanding. In 2013, it formalized a joint venture with Japan Airlines, ANA's historic rival, the company the Japanese government rescued from bankruptcy in 2010 with $350 billion in restructuring funds. The Delta-JAL alliance created a trans-Pacific axis that dominated the highest value routes between Tokyo and major American cities. That was the visible threat: international routes, high profitability, direct competition for corporate passengers. The real threat was something else entirely. Domestic Japanese routes are ANA's cash core. Tokyo-Sapporo, Tokyo-Fukuoka, Tokyo-Osaka, those 3 routes alone rank among the busiest in the world, each carrying more than 10 million passengers per year. They are routes ANA operates with margins it rarely manages to replicate internationally. No foreign company can operate domestic routes in Japan, that's in the law, but the law regulates ownership, not restructuring. And that's what Skymark opened up. A foreign company that acquired a meaningful stake in a bankrupt domestic operator, restructured the operation with new management and fresh capital, could technically reactivate existing operating certificates. It wouldn't be buying an airline, it would be resurrecting one. The invisible threat was this: Delta didn't need to violate a single Japanese law to access the domestic market. It just needed a creative attorney and the bankrupt operator at the right moment. Skymark was that operator, and January 2015 was that moment. In 2010, when Japan Airlines filed for bankruptcy with $25 billion in debt, at the time the largest corporate bankruptcy in post-war Japan, the Hatoyama government actively blocked American funds from participating in the restructuring process. Delta even submitted a formal proposal. It was rejected. The government preferred to inject public capital and maintain national control. The lesson Tokyo drew was clear. When a Japanese airline hits zero, the state steps in. Always. But in 2015, the context was different. The Abe government was at the peak of Abenomics, selling a narrative of openness to foreign capital. Direct state intervention in Skymark would have contradicted the official discourse. The space for a quiet, private solution was real. And ANA understood this before any other player. But here was the trap. Moving too fast meant paying too much, and paying too much for assets you didn't need was exactly the kind of decision that destroys shareholder value, the kind a rational board would never approve on abstract strategic grounds. ANA needed a public justification. The A380s were that justification. What was a geopolitical containment operation needed to look on paper like a fleet decision. And this time, the price was paid in full. The first was a 16.5% stake in the restructured Skymark, below the 20% threshold that under Japanese regulation would have forced ANA to surrender Haneda slots as an antitrust approval condition. Above zero, enough to sit on the board, appoint members, and ensure no foreign operator slipped in through the back door. That stake cost roughly 30 billion yen. It wasn't the strategic acquisition, it was a necessity. The second leg was more expensive and more audacious, the acquisition of the 3 Airbus A380s that Skymark had ordered and that Airbus had no interest in returning to inventory without payment. Total value 150 billion yen, approximately 1.25 billion US dollars at 2015 exchange rates. ANA allocated a 3-aircraft Tokyo-Honolulu route under the brand ANA Honu, a highly seasonal leisure product aimed at Japanese tourists traveling to Hawaii in July, August, and over the New Year period. 3 520-seat aircraft for a route that fills up in summer and empties in winter. The unusual innovation was a transparency of the absurdity itself. ANA didn't try to pretend the A380s were a sound strategic bet. The company created a niche brand, painted the planes with Hawaiian sea turtle motifs, and sold the product as an experience, not as efficiency. It was the only time in Japanese aviation history that a fleet decision was publicly justified with emotional appeal rather than revenue per seat. The vulnerability of the solution was obvious from the start. The A380s had no replacement plan. The Skymark stake generated no meaningful operational synergies. And Indigo Partners, an American fund specializing in low-cost carriers, entered the Skymark restructuring with capital that ANA had no interest in blocking because it had already secured its seat on the board. ANA paid $1.3 billion to keep Delta out. Skymark survived, grew, and today operates more than 30 domestic routes, but under Japanese control. In 2019, the Delta-JAL alliance was renewed and expanded, adding fare coordination and revenue sharing on trans-Pacific routes not previously covered. The agreement was approved by the U.S. Department of Transportation with antitrust immunity, meaning the two companies can price jointly without legal risk in the United States. Delta currently operates 9 daily flights between the United States and Japan. JAL operates 12. Together, the two control more than 45% of trans-Pacific capacity between the two countries. And the 2010 bilateral treaty, the very one that opened Haneda to Delta, is in the process of renegotiation. If new international slots are granted, Delta will have historical incumbency priority. ANA blocked the side entry in 2015. But the front door is still being contested inch by inch, and the adversary has a government-approved joint venture that money alone cannot undo. The Japanese market remains closed. For now, the race isn't over. It just changed lanes. If you want to understand how real money moves in aviation and global infrastructure, subscribe to the Plains News channel for more business stories like this. Thank you for watching.